If I can remember correctly, the first ever UFO crash or whatever was in, as far as I remember, was 1947, Roswell, New Mexico, in which a flying saucer or some UFO of some kind was said to have crashed. Initially, it came out in the news media and the newspapers that it was a crashed UFO, but then they changed the story to a weather balloon that crashed and that sort of thing. Now, I don't know what is true, what is not.
Not too many people had even heard about Oppenheimer until this Nolan movie. What is Albert Einstein's role in World War II then?
Einstein had essentially no role in that. The theoretical groundwork that he did in developing the science of quantum mechanics, that is what led to the eventual technology that was developed for the Manhattan Project. So without the understanding of quantum mechanics that he gave us, we would not have been able to eventually use that to engineer a nuclear bomb and to engineer nuclear reactors.
Okay.
Yeah, so that was his role. He was a theoretician. He was not an experimentalist. He was not an engineer. A pure theoretician.
Oppenheimer hype. Both Abhijit Chavda sir and myself hadn't watched the movie at the time of recording. What I will say about this episode is that it's a slightly geopolitical narrative on the field of science at that time. It's a slightly behind the scenes version of Oppenheimer's life. Whether or not you have seen the movie, you will find a lot of value in this episode. And we also went slightly tangential. Spoke about aliens a little bit, spoke about science a little bit, spoke about the future a little bit, and tried understanding nuclear warfare in much greater detail. It's a heavy, scientific, geopolitical episode that's a breakdown of Christopher Nolan's new film, Oppenheimer. Enjoy today's episode with the legend, Abhijit Chavda. This is for all the people in the house who haven't seen Oppenheimer yet, just like us. Chavda returns. Abhijit Chavda, sir. Welcome back.
Thank you so much. Always wonderful to talk to you.
Likewise, sir. Why have we both not seen Oppenheimer?
Well, I've been very busy traveling and doing things. It's something I really want to watch. It's on my bucket list and it's something I would like to see soon.
What I've heard is that there's a lot of geopolitical narratives within the movie. They have shown a bit of a court case. And I'm sure, knowing Nolan, I've not seen the movie. I'm 100% sure there's a scene of the atom bomb actually going off. Is there? There is, right? Okay. So this podcast is both for the people who haven't watched Oppenheimer and for the people who watched it, but are more podcasting, more raw form of it. So do you think that the right point to start this Oppenheimer story is actually to start with the origin story of Einstein?
The origin story of the entire thing is the birth of quantum mechanics. That's where all this starts. I mean, the atom bomb was developed because of the advances that we made in the first half of the 20th century, which is the birth of quantum mechanics.
Which is down to Einstein?
It did not start with Einstein. It started with Max Planck. It started with Marie Curie and some other scientists who first discovered a few things. And then Einstein took those discoveries, which were so perplexing, and he shone some light on that and explained why these phenomena occur. So that's how it was born.
Maybe then we should begin slightly before quantum mechanics.
Okay.
In order to just understand what quantum mechanics is in the first place.
Okay, let's do that. So until the 19th century, people believed that everything that should be discovered or could be discovered had been discovered. And whatever new discoveries would be made would be at, the degrees of decimal points. So 0.001% change or something like that. So that's what people mostly believed. And then there was this new discovery or new invention, which was the light bulb. So the light bulb has a filament inside, right? That yellow glowing filament. And that was a very brand new technology at the time. And various scientists were wondering how to perfect that. And one of the main questions in that was that if we take a metallic filament in vacuum and we heat it, why does it glow with a certain color at a certain temperature? Okay, that was the big mystery that nobody understood.
As in at different temperatures, it would be green, red, blue, etc.
Yes, that's right. So why does that happen? And nobody had any idea why. And then there was a discovery of radiation, which I believe happened at the very end of the 19th century, which is that certain substances, certain elements are naturally unstable and they radiate certain weird things at a constant rate. So these were new discoveries that nobody could understand and nobody had any idea why these properties existed. So that was the impetus for the birth of quantum mechanics, and it was, I think, Max Planck in 1900 who came up with an equation with the Planck constant h, which said that atoms, light behaves in a certain way, and that essentially was the birth of quantum mechanics. There was the birth of the quantum. So h, the Planck constant, was an integral part of that. And then in 1905, Einstein actually threw light on that as to why it is like this. And so 1905 is called Einstein's Annus Mirabilis, the miracle year, in which he published 5 groundbreaking papers. I think it was 5, most likely 5 papers, which threw light on very different topics. But that was essentially where we started understanding what quantum mechanics is.
What is the meaning of the word quantum? What is the meaning of the word mechanics?
So mechanics means how things work. The mechanics, dynamics, statics, all of that. So let's say if I throw a pebble front of me, why does it go in a parabolic arc? So that's Newton's laws. That's the mechanics of the fall of projectile motion. So quantum mechanics is about how atoms behave and how the subatomic particles in the quantum world, in the ultra microscopic world, behave. So that's what it is. Now, the quantum is the leaps that electrons make within an atom. So, for example, you take the hydrogen atom, it's just one proton at the center, which is the nucleus, and one electron that goes around it. Now, why if an electron goes around the nucleus, then why doesn't it decay? I mean, its orbit should decay because of the laws of electromagnetism, which say that a moving charge is going to radiate radiation. It's going to give off radiation, and therefore its orbit should decay and it should crash into the nucleus.
Orbit should decay, as in it will lose energy.
Yeah, it will lose energy.
Car running out of petrol, almost.
Kind of like that. And the orbit should become smaller and smaller. Eventually, it should crash into the nucleus. But that doesn't happen. Why is that? So then Max Planck came up with a new understanding of the world, that only certain orbits are allowed, and as long as the electron is in that orbit, it will not decay ever. So these are called quantum jumps. Each orbit is a certain quantum state. So that's where the word quantum comes from. So n equal to 1, 2, 3. These are the various different orbits that the electron can have, and these the principal quantum number n is where the word quantum comes from.
Okay.
Yeah.
How does this thought lead to the destruction of Hiroshima and Nagasaki then?
Yeah, that's where it all begins. But then, so initially we knew that we have atoms, but what was the structure of the atom? No one knew. Then I don't know what the exact chronology is in which year what happened, but then we discovered that the atom is mostly empty space, but there's a nucleus at the center. So that was one thing that was discovered. Then the electron was discovered, and then it was discovered that the nucleus of an atom contains protons and neutrons. I think the proton was first discovered. Then eventually the neutron was discovered. So neutrons are neutrally charged particles. They don't have any charge. Protons are positively charged. Electrons are negatively charged. Like charges repel each other. Opposite charges attract. These are the basic laws. So that's how it happened. So this is the beginning of quantum mechanics. We understood what the nature of the atom is, and then they discovered that certain elements, I think it was discovered in the late 19th century, that certain elements are radioactive. They give off some kind of radiation. Now, what that is was not understood, but I think it was in the late 1920s or early 1930s, after the discovery of the neutron, that it was discovered that certain elements in the periodic table decay at a given rate, because and they emit certain particles called alpha particles, which are helium nuclei. So there are 4 different kinds of radiation: alpha particles, then beta particles, which are electrons, then there is gamma radiation, and then there are neutrons. So this was eventually discovered over time, and then it was a German scientist, I believe, who came across the idea that if a neutron can hit an atomic nucleus and break it up, and if the breaking of the atomic nucleus also releases more neutrons, then if you have sufficient quantity of that substance, these neutrons will start hitting atoms one after the other. It's going to cause a chain reaction, which will give off more and more neutrons, and that could give off an enormous amount of energy. So that was the first time the idea of a nuclear reaction, explosion, was thought about in the early 1930s. This was a German scientist, if I'm not mistaken. And then at this time, there was this geopolitical angle that Adolf Hitler was coming to power. The Nazi Party, Germany had been deeply humiliated at the end of the First World War. The nation was destroyed and the economy was destroyed. And then the Nazi Party comes to power. Hitler starts rebuilding the economy and he wants to rebuild Germany's pride and regain its lost prestige and territories and all that. And this was a very dangerous time. Hitler was seen as a very evil person. Obviously, he was evil. We can't deny that. So
He was very evil.
let's oh, we need to put that on the record.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah. We both think he was evil.
Yes, absolutely.
And now we'll move on with the conversation because we're all about learning and correcting the past slightly.
Right.
Because at the end of the day, we are experimenters, researchers, questioners, and that past clip was just a form of understanding the truth better. We've understood the truth. He was Satan in human form.
Absolutely. No denying that.
Let's go on, sir.
So this guy, the German scientist whose name I don't remember right now, he came up with this idea that the release of neutrons could give rise to a chain reaction which could give off an enormous amount of energy from a small amount of matter, a radioactive element. So this, I think idea, I think he patented that, and then he sold the patent, if I'm not mistaken, to the British government. And eventually, there's this guy called J. Robert Oppenheimer, who was a theoretical physicist. He was in some university in the US, and he came upon this idea, and he initially rejected it, and he was of the opinion it can't happen. But I think one of his students discovered that German scientists had actually made this happen with uranium 238, I believe it was. There are two different isotopes of uranium, 235 and 238 mainly. So I think German scientists were the first to do this. They used neutrons to break apart a uranium atom, and that released more neutrons. So that is something that will definitely give you a chain reaction if you know how to make it happen. So that news came out, and then Oppenheimer and his student, they tried it out and they discovered that it actually works. And then you had the birth of the atom bomb project, because the Germans had already taken a lead. They had already done this experiment before the Americans and anybody else. So then the US government got involved in this.
Let's rewind a little bit to understand this better.
Yeah.
In the 2020s, where we are right now,
Huh.
would an equivalent technology be general artificial intelligence or something? Like AI is just taking off in the world. I've spoken about it enough on the podcast. What would be the 2023 equivalent of such a scientific scenario when everyone knows that, oh man, we're sitting on something? So did the whole world know about nuclear power? Like that it's a new scientific phenomenon, or was it kind of under wraps?
It was deeply secret. It was kept very secret under wraps because that was like a revolutionary, groundbreaking technology. Today, if you were to think of something like that, I would think of tabletop nuclear fusion. So right now, we haven't achieved nuclear fusion on planet Earth unless it's in a nuclear explosion. A nuclear explosion is uncontrolled fusion. I'm talking about the thermonuclear reaction, the hydrogen bomb. But we haven't been able to achieve sustained and controlled nuclear fusion ever.
So the atom bombs that were used in World War II were based on nuclear fission.
Fission.
Where it's exactly what you explained. You throw a neutron at a nucleus and then it splits up. That's what fission is.
Yes.
Fusion is what?
Fusion is fission is when you split an atom, when you split a nucleus. Fusion is when you take two different nuclei, maybe of hydrogen or deuterium or tritium, and you squash them together so hard that they're going to fuse together and give rise to a new element. And that gives off an enormous amount of energy, more energy than fission would give you. So that's nuclear fusion.
Enough to destroy our planet?
Not enough to destroy a planet, but if you have sufficient quantity of fusionable material, then you may be able to do that. See, every time you look at the sun, you're witnessing nuclear fusion. The sun is a fusion reaction going on in real time, and that's what keeps us alive. So it's an enormous amount of energy that it gives out. So a nuclear fusion is the opposite of fission, but it gives off more energy, and it doesn't have any radioactive byproducts as such compared to nuclear fission.
I believe the problem with nuclear fusion is that we as humans have not figured out how to control it.
That's right.
That's why people are not delving into nuclear fusion technologies.
They're trying.
They're figuring that now.
Yeah, so it takes an enormous amount of energy to just to squash two nuclei together.
Okay.
Huge amount of energy, but then the output is way more than you initially put into it. But it's very hard to control that amount of energy and to squeeze nuclei together.
Little science fiction question. If we are able to control nuclear fusion, what are the applications of it in terms of real world technologies? Spaceships?
First of all, you could get almost unlimited electric power. Okay, because you need a very little amount of material to undergo fusion to give off a huge amount of energy. For example, on the surface of the moon, you have the moon's soil, the regolith, which contains an abundance of certain isotope of helium called helium 5. One of the isotopes of helium. So this isotope of helium is an extremely good potential fuel for future nuclear fusion reactors. And about a kilo of that would be enough to sustain a whole city for a year or so. I mean, I'm just giving you a rough ballpark figure, but that's the kind of thing it is. So it would give you essentially unlimited energy if you use it in a good way. But of course, you can create more wondrous weapons with that. And you could even power spaceships indefinitely. You could power submarines indefinitely if you have that. So yeah, the applications of such a technology would be essentially endless. It could help you maybe reach outer space beyond, maybe beyond the solar system. If you want a power source that will sustain you for a century, maybe that's what you want. So that sort of thing. So the nuclear fusion, if you can control it, that would be the kind of quantum leap of technology that we would have today, which would be comparable to what they had in the 1930s, 1940s with nuclear fission.
Do you think China or America actually figured nuclear fusion and are
The
keeping it
Chinese,
under wraps?
yes. The Chinese are working on something called an artificial sun. So that's a nuclear fusion. They're testing nuclear fusion technology. They haven't yet achieved fusion. It's something called some form of a tokamak, which is a toroidal thing in which you have magnetic confinement. You have a plasma inside a machine in vacuum, and the plasma is an extremely hot form of matter, extraordinarily hot form of matter, but it's confined within a certain region with through magnetic fields. So that's what the Chinese are working on, and the Americans also have certain such projects, and I believe there's such technology being tried out in Europe as well. And somewhere or the other, I think they have got more energy output than they input into it. So I think we are on the cusp of maybe making this work in the next few years, possibly.
Okay. Very tiny stray away from Oppenheimer. Have you been following this whole America talking about UFOs thing?
Oh, I have.
For the sake of TRS clips and the sake of the audience which wants to hear this from you, it's Tuesday today, right? I believe.
Yes.
This episode is getting released on Friday.
Okay.
So this whole American alien UFO thing has happened 2 or 3 days ago. Let's talk a little bit about that, just to understand the magnitude of what the world's governments are actually capable of hiding.
So the Americans, they recently had this disclosure thing or whatever, in which various former US government officials came out in public and went on record saying that they have recovered alien artifacts and certain biologics, non-human biologics. So that's the term they used. So thus far, I think and they gave this as sworn testimony. So if they have been lying, it means they perjured themselves and they will be liable for punishment of some kind or the other. So they have given this sworn testimony that the US government is in possession of alien technology, alien artifacts, and non-human biologics or whatever that is.
What does that mean, non-human biologics?
So that's a point of contention. Non-human biologics from a layperson's perspective would mean that alien bodies of alien individuals. But from a scientific perspective, it can also mean grass. Or it could mean a mushroom. It could mean a cat or a pigeon or anything. So they've used a vague term which could mean a lot of things. So it's not really specific. And they've made the claim that the US government has alien artifacts. Now, this is once again, from my perspective, it's words. We haven't seen any actual evidence of this. I mean, there are lots of UFO sightings and videos, and the US government has also, the US military has also released videos of the Tic Tac UFO and certain other things. But all I can see is some grainy footage, black and white footage, and and words, testimony, but show us an actual artifact, show us a high quality video. I mean, everyone has that, everybody has good cameras and all nowadays. Show us a high quality video of this, and then make full disclosure. So as far as I'm concerned, I am still not 100% convinced. All I have seen is words. So I am still a very skeptical person. I still am. I want to believe. I want to believe, but I am unable to believe thus far because they have not shown any real hard evidence.
Okay.
Yeah.
What about the first two, where they said alien artifacts and UFOs?
Alien artifacts and biologics.
That's it. Two things they've.
Two things, as far as I remember, they've
Okay.
spoken about.
Alien artifacts is very likely some sort of weaponry or equipment,
Or a crashed UFO or something like that. Crashed craft, spacecraft. That's what it sounds like, alien artifacts. I mean, what else could it be?
Okay.
Yeah.
So a UFO that's come from another galaxy, it's traveled across space, crashes on Earth's body. Like after traveling through space, it crashes on Earth's ground.
Yeah.
How does something crash on Earth in the first place? It's traveled through space.
Yeah, I mean, to crash onto the Earth, you need to first of all get into Earth's orbit and then descend through the atmosphere and then make contact with the ground. So if you have the technology that will allow you to go across star systems and maybe even traverse galaxies, I don't think it would be very hard for you to go and land on a planet. So why would you crash, first of all? So yeah, it doesn't make sense to me, but that's what they claim.
Or it was friendly aliens and the American Air Force or some Air Force would have shot it down.
I'm sure they have if they can travel across galaxies or star systems, they can defend themselves from against a puny little missile that comes from human technology. I mean, the technology they would have would be orders of magnitude beyond what we have. It would be technology we can't even imagine. That would look like magic to us. So it doesn't really make sense to me that the US government would be able to shoot something down.
Have they claimed something like it's been with them since 10 decades? That's the rumor making the rounds.
Yeah, the first ever, if I can remember correctly, the first ever UFO crash or whatever was as far as I remember, was 1947, Roswell, New Mexico, in which a flying saucer or some UFO of some kind was said to have crashed. Initially, it came out in the news media and the newspapers that it was a crashed UFO, but then they changed the story to a weather balloon that crashed and that sort of thing. Now, I don't know what is true, what is not, but if the first artifacts that they recovered, if they were in 1947, that's at least 75 or so years before today. That's like 3/4 of a century, if that's the case.
Why now? Why are they talking about it now?
That's a question. Why are they trying to make disclosure now? Given the fact that if they actually have this evidence, then they've been concealing it for decades. Why are they revealing this now? And that's a question that I am unable to answer. Is this a distraction? Are they trying to distract the world's attention from something else that's happening somewhere else? I mean, it's come out in the news in recent times that whenever there was a coup attempt somewhere or something, they would plant stories of UFOs and flying saucers in the media to divert the public's attention from something that's really important, something that's happening, and the US government was involved in that. So it's often a diversionary tactic to release certain public interest stories that will grab the public imagination to divert attention away from something else. But I'm only speculating. I don't really know why they're disclosing this now.
Is there a coup happening anywhere?
Oh, there's a coup happening right now as we speak. It's in Africa. It's in which country? It's in Niger. I think the coup has already happened. Okay. The French have been evicted from there. And Mr. Putin and the Wagner company are involved in this, and the French are very unhappy. And there could be a counter coup which could happen soon in the next hours or days. Who knows?
Really?
Yes.
Counter coup, obviously because of America.
The French.
Oh.
So in Western Africa, they typically been the French who have dominated the region. They still actually are the colonizers by proxy of this region. And this country, Niger, the coup has been to free this country from French domination. So then the French are unhappy because the Niger is a big producer of uranium. The topic of our overall topic of our this conversation today. Uranium is what gives you nuclear power, and a significant amount of French electricity is generated from nuclear power, maybe more than 60%. So they need uranium. And Niger is a major producer of uranium, and now they have evicted all the French soldiers from their territory, which means France has lost control of the uranium mines in this country, and that's not a good thing for them.
We've lost control to Russia.
Yes. Russia is involved in this. The Wagner Group, Mr. Prigozhin's, paramilitary force is most likely present on the soil of this nation, and they could help the government, the new government, the coup regime, to prevent a counter coup or something. So there's a lot going on over there right now.
Very tiny update on Russia Ukraine is
Right now, the war is very slow right now. Russia is in control of roughly a fifth of the country, the Donbas region, and whatever counteroffensive the Ukrainians have tried, have all the counteroffensives have unfortunately, from their perspective, failed very badly. Eventually, it looks like Ukraine may break up, and Poland may be a new entrant into this war, and they may gobble up whatever is left of Ukraine, incorporate that into Polish territory. Belarus may get involved on the side of Russia. So there's a whole lot happening there as well.
this may get involved is because the leaders of those countries have come out and shown support.
Yes, Belarus essentially is a Russian vassal. It's a Russian client state. Lukashenko, their president, is a great ally and supporter of Mr. Putin, and the Wagner Group has a presence right now in Belarus, and Russia has also transferred tactical nuclear weapons onto Belarus territory, which tells you that Belarus is fully and firmly under Russian control.
This war happening, this coup happening, is it normal? Or are we seeing a cycle repeat itself? And I ask you once again, Abhijit Chavda, because we've used this title on so many thumbnails. Is this the start of a bit of a world war? And I say that very cautiously.
Well, the good question. The situation kind of reminds me of the days of the early 1910s, right before the First World War started. There was this absolute geopolitical mess at the time. Lots of countries were trying to regain lost territory, and lots of all various alliances were forming, and counter alliances were being formed, similar to what we are seeing right now. So there is a mess in Ukraine, in Eastern Europe. Poland may get involved. Europe is being deindustrialized essentially by starving it of energy. So all the industries are not doing well. Europe is going into recession. Germany has officially entered recession. There is a mess in Africa. So much is happening. And there's a whole different angle in Asia as well. There is the Taiwan angle. There's the India-China angle. The Pakistan nuisance is always there. North Korea is there. The Russia-Japan angle. There's a whole lot happening. The world is kind of in very rapid motion now geopolitically, and a lot could change in the next couple of years. Who knows?
And possibly nuclear fusion has been invented somewhere.
Possibly we may have overcome the threshold at which you get more energy output than you're inputting into it. But using that in a sustained, controlled manner may take at least a decade, perhaps more. So it's not something we can start using right away.
Equivalent of early 1930s a little bit as well?
Equivalent of the beginning of the Manhattan Project, perhaps, which is the early 1940s. So that's when the US understood the potential of uranium, and they decided that we need to get this technology in our hands before the Germans develop it. So that was the beginning of the Manhattan Project, which was overseen by Oppenheimer.
We began by talking about Oppenheimer, but the reason we're bringing up all this is because the greatest lesson in history is that history repeats itself.
It is, yes.
So it's very important to understand history as well as what's happening in your present times. Otherwise, there's no point in studying the present times or in studying history if you don't understand that they're linked. Which is why I'll probably take the narrative back to the 1930s. Why was a whole movie made on Professor Oppenheimer?
So he is an extremely pivotal figure. Fairly or unfairly, he's regarded as the father of the atomic bomb. And he is regarded as the father of atomic power and atomic energy as well. So he oversaw the Manhattan Project, which was essentially an emergency project that the Americans cobbled together. They brought together the world's best scientists, the best theoretical physicists, the best chemists, the best engineers, and also the American armed forces, the military, put all these people together. And the mission was to assemble a nuclear reactor and create a nuclear bomb ASAP, as soon as possible. And the pressure was that the Germans could do it before us. And you don't want nukes in Germany's hands. You don't want nukes in Adolf Hitler's hands. There was a whole thing. So and by that time it was known that uranium undergoes fission. You can use a neutron, you can shoot a neutron at a uranium nucleus, and it will break up, it will give off more neutrons. And that is something that will start a chain reaction if you know how to engineer that. So the question was, how do you engineer atoms? How do you get a neutron to strike an atomic nucleus and then to engineer the rest of the chain reaction process? So then what they did was, Congo. So Congo, there were 3 or 4 places at the time where you had uranium mines. One was Canada, one was Czechoslovakia, one was Congo, and one was somewhere else, maybe California or something. So the Americans persuaded the Belgians, who held Congo at the time, to reopen the uranium mines over there. And they did that. They were obviously paid for it. And several thousand tons of uranium ore were shipped to the US. I think 1,500 tons or so were shipped to the US. Now, this uranium ore is all dust and rocks and some uranium. It has to be purified. Then when you purify uranium, you get uranium-238. So when you get a brick or let's say a kilogram of uranium metal out of it, 99.3% of that is going to be uranium-238. And only 0.7% is going to be uranium-235. But the isotope you want is 235. So that's really hard to procure. So you got to invent means to purify the uranium and to extract the uranium-235 out of it. So they had to devise new mass spectroscopy and various other ways. They would create this uranium hexafluoride gas and then use certain techniques to take out the uranium-235. So that was a very long procedure. A lot of engineering prowess went into that, but eventually they were able to start purifying uranium, enrich uranium to uranium-235 to about 90% purity, which is weapons grade uranium. So all this was overseen by J. Robert Oppenheimer, who was a theoretical physicist, not an experimentalist, but the US Army military, I think they regarded him as a genius, and he actually did the job. So a whole bunch of the world's best physicists, chemists, all of them, Enrico Fermi, Richard Feynman, and a whole host of other scientists, they all came together. And by 1944 or 1945, they had enough uranium to put together, the first rudimentary nuclear bomb. So they assembled one bomb in which the fissile material was uranium, and one bomb in which the fissile material was plutonium. And the first test was done in New Mexico somewhere in 1945. I think it was in July. It was a plutonium bomb, and it worked. That's called the Trinity test. So that is the culmination of the Manhattan Project. They had 2 more bombs that they had constructed by that time, one uranium, one plutonium. These were shipped off to Japan, and in August, one was dropped on Hiroshima, and a few days later, the next was dropped on Nagasaki. And they had more bombs in the pipeline, but they chose not to use those. And by, I think, October or November that year, the Japanese surrendered. So that is how the nuclear weapons technology was born, and J. Robert Oppenheimer was the father, is regarded as the father of this technology.
So during times of worldwide conflict, do the scientists in these developed nations become an extended wing of the army?
Yes, if you co-opt them into the military effort, definitely, because the only way to overcome your enemy is to have better technology.
To just make the audiences understand this better, the hypothetical Indian scenario is that if India enters a war with anybody tomorrow, there's going to be a call from the PMO to ISRO, and they're going to tell ISRO, listen, stop whatever you're doing and start working on some technologies that will assist us in this war. Am I right in thinking this way?
Definitely, yes. So the call would go out not just to ISRO, it would go out to BARC, it would go out to every other institute where you have high quality scientists. And the objective would be to give us the technological edge. Whatever the Chinese or whoever has, we need something better than that. We need the technological edge. It's always technology that gives you the results in war. The side with the better technology wins, because technology is a force multiplier.
Speaking about technology, whenever it was tech for World War II, growing up, we only heard about Albert Einstein. Not too many people had even heard about Oppenheimer until this Nolan movie. What is Albert Einstein's role in World War II then?
Einstein had essentially no role in that. The theoretical groundwork that he did in developing the science of quantum mechanics, that is what led to the eventual technology that was developed for the Manhattan Project. So without the understanding of quantum mechanics that he gave us, we would not have been able to eventually use that to engineer a nuclear bomb and to engineer nuclear reactors.
Okay.
Yeah, so that was his role. He was a theoretician. He was not an experimentalist. He was not an engineer, a pure theoretician.
Okay. Now let's speak about Oppenheimer. So say he was recruited by the American government and they told him that, listen, we're at war. You're one of the best scientists in the world. You need to help us with the technological edge. Therefore, we're giving you this project where you have to further the understanding of nuclear technology. Is that the likely narrative that was given by the American government to him? Or did they tell him, listen, at some point, we're going to have to drop atom bombs on our enemies because they'll drop it on us first? What was the narrative given to him?
The narrative was that the Germans have already achieved nuclear fission. And they will definitely be working on a nuclear bomb project. So we need the bomb before them. That was the narrative. So get together the best scientists that you know of, assemble them together in a team. We're gonna give you the assistance of the US Army, the military. They will give you whatever you need. You get together with General whoever he is, I forget the name of the guy, and you assemble a team, a crack team together. You will get whatever funds you want. Get this done. There was the brief given to him.
Okay. I believe the movie is about a court case that happens post World War II.
Right.
Am I right? So, what was the court case then?
So Oppenheimer was a very interesting person. He had a certain political ideology. Ideologically, he was left-leaning. He had associations with the Communist Party of the United States. And I believe his wife was a member of the Communist Party, maybe even his brother. So that was a deal. But he was a patriot and he worked for the US and he developed this entire project. He made it happen. But you see, when all the scientists who were working, all the physicists, engineers, etc., who were working on the Manhattan Project, they were all spied upon by the FBI. And because, there was always the possibility of somebody leaking information to the enemy, and that actually happened. Eventually, a few names came out. There was a German-born physicist who was passing on Manhattan Project information to the Soviets.
Damn.
So, yeah, and that came out later on. So at that time, they did not realize it. So there was this intense surveillance on each and every person. There was a proper file and dossier created for every person. All their whereabouts were known. They would be tailed. They would be surveilled. There was no privacy, whether they knew it or not, that sort of thing. Okay. So after everything was done, after the World War II, there was this intense period of what they call McCarthyism in the US, in which communism was declared to be an un-American ideology, an enemy ideology, because it was the USSR's ideology. And the US government went after anybody who was suspected of having any sympathy for communism. And this guy, Oppenheimer, was he had very clear communist leanings. His family members were involved in this. So they revoked his security clearances. They kind of disgraced him. There was a witch hunt against him, and it was a kind of humiliation for him. And he faced a lot of hardships. He had to come and testify against in front of various committees and prove his innocence. And even though he was never found guilty of any kind of wrongdoing, but he was tarnished because of his communist association. And I believe there must have been court cases and all that against him. So he was demonized, and there was this terrible witch hunt against him. And he became very bitter and unhappy naturally because of that.
So he was going through hell in America post World War II.
Oh, definitely he was going through hell because all of his, I believe many of his colleagues must have distanced themselves from him, cancelled him, so to say. That sort of thing. He was cancelled, very publicly. It was a humiliation and all that. So yeah, it was a very bad time for him. Obviously, if you see his interviews in later times when he is a much older person, you can see the bitterness and the sadness in his face, that sort of thing. So yeah, they treated him very badly, a genuine American hero. And he was not a guy who wanted to kill people with nuclear bombs. He was doing it because he was ordered to do it. And he always had a lot of regret for what happened. I mean, the number of people that were killed in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, it was very, very, he felt a lot of guilt for that, He was, one could say, a Hindu possibly, because he was a Sanskrit scholar. He had translated the Bhagavad Gita from Sanskrit to English himself, from the original Sanskrit, and he would quote passages from the Bhagavad Gita and all that. So yeah, so when it came to building the atomic bomb and unleashing this terrible power, he reminded himself of what Lord Krishna told Arjun, that just do your duty, don't worry about the consequences, that sort of thing.
I would also urge my editing team to play that voice clip of his, which has now become famous.
Yeah.
Here we go.
We knew the world would not be the same. Few people laughed, few people cried, most people were silent. I remembered the line from the Hindu scripture, the Bhagavad Gita. Vishnu is trying to persuade the prince that he should do his duty, and to impress him takes on his multi-armed form and says, "Now I am become deaf, suppose we all thought that, one way or another.
What made him say that? I have become death, the destroyer of worlds.
There are so many remarkable passages in the Bhagavad Gita, but I think this one came to him immediately when he saw the incredible brilliance and the shattering, blinding brightness of the first nuclear explosion, the Trinity explosion, which shone brighter than the sun. The nuclear test took place, I think, around 5:20 or 5:30 in the morning, in the pre-dawn time, before the sun rises. And this nuclear flash, it shone brighter than the sun can ever shine. It illuminated all the hills around the place like you would never imagine it. And for some reason, that verse came to his mind. And that's why he is so closely associated with that particular passage of the Bhagavad Gita.
It's also from a human empathy perspective. This human being has given a significant portion of his prior decades to furthering nuclear technology. Maybe somewhere in his heart he knew, not somewhere in his heart, he obviously knew that this is going to turn into a bomb at that point. But maybe he was so into his work and furthering his understanding of science due to his love for science, he just kept going forward. And then somewhere along the lines, he realized, oh man, I've given so much of my time to something that has actually caused this much suffering in the world.
Right, definitely the guilt was there, but it also advanced. See, obviously the atomic bomb is a terrible thing. It ended World War II, but it set off the Cold War. And it set off the situation that we have today where so many nuclear weapons are pointed at various nations. So that's something that is something that his work triggered off, right? But it also led to lots of advances in nuclear technology, nuclear medicine, which is used to diagnose and cure cancer. It gave us nuclear power, which is actually a very clean form of power. So all of this was done, all of these advances in technology and science happened because of him. Technology is always a double-edged sword. You can use it for good or for bad. It's up to the person who wields the technology, right? So as a scientist, he did his duty. His country called upon him. They said, we need you to do this. He did his duty and he produced the goods. But then over time, he saw how it was used, and that left a lot of bitterness in him.
So I think we're almost at the end of this episode. The only question my teammates have actually sent to me in order to get more insight on through you is this whole angle of nuclear fusion that was spoken about in the movie. I believe there's a scene where someone tells Oppenheimer that, hey, if we actually go for nuclear fusion, it might be an even bigger explosion that we'll be able to create. But there's a 0.1% chance that the Earth can get destroyed. It's been a long time since World War II. And say if there is another worldwide conflict, who's to say that someone won't be stupid enough to use a nuclear weapon somewhere? So this is a two-pronged question. One, I would love to understand the science and geopolitics of this scene where they speak about nuclear fusion. And two, do you think human beings are stupid enough to actually use nuclear weapons in a big way again?
Right. So the nuclear fusion angle was that there was a very small possibility. I'm not sure who came up with this. I've not seen the movie. But there was a small possibility, a tiny possibility, that the first nuclear explosion or any nuclear explosion, because of the incredibly high temperatures, would cause there's a very little amount of hydrogen in our atmosphere, very little. It could possibly cause the hydrogen to fuse together and give off a huge amount of energy, which would trigger off more fusion reactions. It could possibly even dissociate the water molecules in the atmosphere into oxygen and hydrogen, and cause those hydrogen atoms to start fusing. And that could trigger off a global, planet-wide fusion reaction of all the hydrogen. There was also a possibility that the nitrogen itself might start burning up in the atmosphere. So the overall possibility, even though it was very small, was that the entire atmosphere might burn up. That's what was feared. And various physicists calculated the probability of this happening, and they said it was negligible, it won't happen. But Oppenheimer was kind of concerned about this, right? So this is the fusion angle, that there was a small possibility that the entire atmosphere would burn up, and this test of the nuclear weapon could end up destroying the entire planet. So that is the first thing. Now, secondly, that same calculation of hydrogen fusing together gave rise to the possibility in scientists' minds that there could be a different kind of weapon that we could create, which would use the initial fission reaction to trigger off a secondary fusion reaction of various hydrogen isotopes like deuterium and tritium. And that is something that eventually gave rise to the hydrogen bomb or the thermonuclear bomb, which is essentially a three-stage explosion. There is an initial conventional explosive explosion that causes the two hemispheres or whatever of uranium or plutonium to come together, which gives off the chain reaction that sets off the fusion or the fission reaction. And this fission reaction would cause a secondary or tertiary fusion reaction, which would give off incredible amounts of energy. I think it was in 1950s, 52 or something, that the first hydrogen bomb was tested. And the first fission bomb, the Trinity bomb, it gave a yield of, I don't know how many kilotons, maybe 20 kilotons of TNT. The first hydrogen bomb, the IV Mike explosion, gave an output of maybe 10 megatons of TNT, like 1,000 times more. Now, that sort of thing. So that's what fusion is. And eventually the Soviets in the 1960s or something tested the Tsar Bomba, which is the largest explosion ever manufactured, which is about 50 megatons of TNT. They actually wanted a 100 megaton explosion, but they could not engineer it properly. But I'm sure they can do it today. So that's the fusion thing. That's the fusion angle, the hydrogen bomb angle.
Let's paint a present scenario. Maybe a tertiary question is also explain what nuclear winter means.
Oh, that's a frightful prospect. Okay. You also asked me whether anybody is crazy enough to start off a nuclear war.
Yeah.
I hope nobody is. I hope nobody is crazy enough to do that. I'm sure that people have sane minds and nobody is going to press the red button. But who knows?
Even North Koreans?
I don't think the North Korean leader is crazy. I don't think Mr. Kim is a madman, even though he's painted as such. He's kind of eccentric and all, so it's easier to paint him like that. I don't think he would do that. Yeah, I hope he doesn't do that. So see, we went to the Cold War and no such thing happened. We came close a couple of times, but sane minds overall prevailed. So today, I think we are in a slightly better situation and there's not any urgency to press the red button. So I think I genuinely hope and pray it doesn't happen. Now, what's nuclear winter? Okay, so this to understand that, we have to consider the scenario in which somebody is crazy enough to press the button. So let's say somebody is crazy enough to press the red button, and someone, let's say from Russia. Okay, let's consider the hypothetical case of Russia. Somebody in Russia, some military commander, for some reason, presses the red button, shoots off a ballistic missile towards the US. The US has automatic systems that will detect a ballistic missile launch, and they will calculate very rapidly that the trajectory brings it on US territory. It is inevitable that you have to respond before the missile hits you. So they're going to set off a bunch of launches to retaliate. Once the Russians see that a bunch of missiles is coming towards them, they're going to send some more. And within maybe minutes, you're going to have hundreds of missiles being launched at each other. Ballistic missiles typically take about 30 minutes. Cruise missiles, they might take hours. And we have ballistic missile defenses and countermeasures and all that. Let's say they take care of 50% of the missiles, but we have thousands of missiles and nuclear warheads on the planet. So eventually, in this unfortunate hypothetical scenario, the warheads will start hitting the US and Russia. They will not only hit the major cities, they will hit all the military sites. And the Russians know that according to NATO protocol or according to the NATO treaty, if the US is hit with a nuclear strike, its NATO allies are obliged to retaliate, which means that France and Britain are also targets, which means they will also take out France and Britain. It's going to be a catastrophe. So then what happens? You have thousands of nuclear explosions in Europe, on US soil, hopefully not in Asia, but it doesn't make any difference. What happens is that once these nuclear explosions start going off, they're going to vaporize entire patches of ground, create big craters, and all that vaporized material is going to go high up into the atmosphere because it's incredibly hot. There is going to be a lot of burning of cities and forests and trees and whatnot, organic material, which is going to give off a huge amount of carbon, which will go up into the atmosphere as soot. And after a few hours, you're going to have an entire planet-wide covering of carbon soot high up in the atmosphere, which is going to block out the sunlight. And this situation will persist for months or maybe years, depending on how many nuclear warheads have gone off. So even though most people won't die of nuclear contamination, radiation sickness, poisoning, all that, what will happen is that in the northern hemisphere, at the higher latitudes, even at medium latitudes, there's gonna be freezing temperatures which will prevail for days, weeks, maybe months, or even years. Various calculations show that it could kill off about 90 or to 99% of humanity. People in the equatorial regions may survive, but it's going to destroy the entire global system. There could be food scarcity and all. So it could be kind of like the aftermath of the Chicxulub impact that happened 66 million years ago, which killed off the non-avian dinosaurs. So that's what a nuclear winter is like. It's a complete disaster, and that's what will happen if somebody presses the red button.
And even sends one missile.
Even sends one missile. That's enough. That's enough. Terrible, terrible nightmare scenario. That's what we are living on the brink of every single moment.
Any signing off notes for this uncomfortable podcast?
Well, we human beings have good sides and bad sides to ourselves. Everybody has a bit of light, a bit of dark. We're all shades of gray. I hope that overall, in the long run, at the end of the day, the better side of our human nature will shine through and take us through this difficult time. In the long run, maybe we will go and colonize, settle down on maybe the moon, on Mars also. I hope we don't take that over there, nuclear weapons technology. I hope we use science and technology for good. The nuclear weapons conundrum that we have today is not something that's going to be solved anytime soon. But I hope that the leadership has a sane mind and doesn't use it. Overall, I am optimistic for humanity. We have survived how many thousands of years? 300,000 years. Hopefully, we survive at least 300,000 more. So okay. I'm optimistic overall.
And the obvious plan for survival should be space exploration and keeping bits and pieces of human biology in space as well.
I think it makes sense for us to make the leap to the next frontier. Until recently, the final frontier was the ocean. That's where you would go and explore. But now we have discovered everything there is to discover on the surface of the planet. So now it makes sense for us to make the leap to the moon and to Mars. I think there's a new space race that's beginning right now. India is also involved. We have a spacecraft right now on the way to the moon, right? So that is the next frontier. I think by the 2030s, 2040s, we're going to have people definitely on the moon, maybe Indians as well. And we're going to have the first steps on Mars as well. So I think that's a great step for humanity. Eventually, we're going to, who knows, travel far and wide.
Okay.
So exciting.
Okay. AC, another epic episode. All I'll say is that we'll be back soon. And thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. My pleasure.
Thank you. That was the episode for today. I remember the first time I recorded videos with AC. I thought, we've recorded 4 videos. I don't know how many more podcasts we'll be able to do together. And we've easily done 15 to 20 episodes already over the course of 2 years. There's a lot more topics for us to explore. So please keep suggesting the topics that you want AC and myself to break down. We will follow whatever you say. Just keep supporting us. Make sure you follow AC everywhere on Instagram, on YouTube, on Twitter. Gents like this need to be celebrated on a world stage. If you're a viewer from outside the Indian subcontinent, make sure you check out our entire library of podcasts. There's a lot of content, especially on our English YouTube channel, that you'll find a lot of value within. Lots of love from AC, from BB, and the rest of the team. We'll see you later on TRS.